So tonight, our program, The Future of Feminism, is a topic that is moving fast and furiously, literally, there's fury in this. Where are we and where are we going? I don't have an answer, but I'm really excited to be able to listen tonight because we have an incredibly esteemed, distinguished, wonderful panel. So let me tell you a little bit about who they are. Koa Beck is the editor-in-chief of Jezebel. Her reporting has appeared in marieclaire.com, Vogue.com, The Atlantic, The New York Observer, The Guardian, Esquire.com, among many others. Her short stories have been published in Slice, Kalyani Magazine, Apogea Journal, Nat.Brood, and The Ink and Code. She is the winner of the 2009 Ardella Mills Prize for Fiction and has been nominated for the Pushcart Prize. A graduate of Mills College, she lives in Brooklyn and serves on the board of directors of Nat.Brood. She is the former executive editor of Vogue.com and the former senior features editor of marieclaire.com. Ashley C. Ford lives in Brooklyn by way of Indiana. She is currently writing her memoir, Somebody's Daughter, which will be published by Flatiron Books under the imprint and Oprah Book. Ford hosts the Brick Show and podcast 112BK, contributes to cupofjoe.com, and hosts Fortune Favors the Bold, a collaboration between Gimlet Creative and MasterCard. She has written or guest edited for The Guardian, Elle, BuzzFeed, Slate, Teen Vogue, New York Magazine, Lenny Letter, Into, and various other web and print publications. And she's been named among Forbes Magazine's 30 Under 30 in Media, Brooklyn Magazine's Brooklyn 100, and Time Out New York's New Yorkers of the Year. And finally, Rebecca Carroll, who will be moderating and I hope also participating actively in this conversation, but wears the hat of moderator, is a producer of special projects on race at WNYC. She is a regular opinion writer at The Guardian US and the author of 5 nonfiction books, including Sugar in the Raw, which won the ALA Yalsa Award, and Saving the Race. She is a former producer for The Charlie Rose Show and hosted the talk show Doc Stock on the Plum TV network, which earned her an Emmy nomination. She has held senior editor positions at the Huffington Post and Paper Magazine, and her essays, profiles, and film and book criticism has appeared in the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, Ebony, the Daily Beast, Gawker, and many others. So please help me welcome Koa, Ashley, and Rebecca.
Very tall. Hello, everyone. Welcome. So without making this about the Oscars, I'm going to start talking about the Oscars. And even if you didn't see it, by now you have heard that Frances McDormand, who won for Best Actress, Best Actress in a lead film. I don't know what the proper term is for that, and she gave a very powerful speech. But before she gave that speech, she asked all of the women in the room to stand up. And she gave this very provocative, very moving speech, and then she ended it by saying 2 words, inclusion rider. Now, nobody knew, I didn't know, what an inclusion rider is. I mean, you could surmise what it is. But when I went back to look at what it meant, it is to stipulate that there be more diversity on the set of a film for an A-lister. That's something that they can put in their contract. But that it also stipulates racial and gender equality. And she only asked the women to stand up, not women and people of color, not women and people of color and transgender, LGBTQ folks, or people in the disability community. And so, to me, that says therein lies the enduring blind spot of the white feminist. What does that mean to you, Koa?
No pressure. I think we're in a moment right now where white feminism, more so than other pockets of history, is really being analyzed and discussed I know that when Trump won, the data about the number of white women who came out specifically to vote for him was everywhere. What was missing from that conversation is that that is part of a trend. White women always do this. They support really racist candidates, they support anti-abortion candidates, they support anti-LGBTQ candidates. It's very consistent. So
In very strong numbers, you're saying.
very
Yeah.
strong numbers. This isn't like a small margin. This is like by and large how they vote, and this is data we've had for a while. So I think that it's important that we look back as well as forward, but also that we be hypercritical of people who use our discourse to advance the needs and visibility of one type of woman.
Mm-hmm. Ashley?
Who, girl? I mean, I agree with everything that Koa said. I think part of the issue that we have often with white feminism is something that we have with folks who are marginalized in one way or another often, which is that we got it in our heads, I think, at some point that if you are marginalized, you can't also be an asshole. And that's not true. You can be marginalized in one way and be an asshole to other marginalized people in other ways. I think one of the things that people are hesitant to take on, especially when they have a marginalized identity like woman, is the idea of where they have power. How can I have power and also be oppressed? And it's like, yeah, you might be oppressed by men, okay? Like, yeah, I get that. I'm a woman too. We are oppressed by men in a lot of ways. Not every man. I know y'all needed me to say that, the dudes who are out here. But yeah, like as a general rule, we are. And I think that the problem that we have there is that you look at your oppression and you think, I am without power. My job is to fight for my power no matter what. And you don't really acknowledge the way that your power, whether you see it or acknowledge it, when other people are telling you about your power, the power that you have and the way that you have wielded it that is harmful or damaging to them, it is not acceptable to talk then about the ways you have been damaged by people who have oppressed you. That is not a counter argument. You're just adding information. That's it.
You know,
and I think it's hard for people to see that.
I agree, and I also think, you know, she later, McDormand later went on to clarify or expand upon, you know, after the show, that I just found out about this, she said, last week. And so the fact that I just learned about this after 35 years of being in the business, we're not going back, she said. And so what I wonder in that statement, we're not going back, back to what and forward to where? Because you're talking about power and agency, and Koa and I were talking backstage about how to create agency without also suggesting hierarchy. Because I look at Frances McDormand, whose work I admire, and I think that's a whole hell of a lot of power. And that it didn't occur to her to say, Black folks, people of color, people from the LGBT community. I mean, that's a power that needs to be peeled back, cracked open before we move forward. Koa?
Agreed, and also a criticism that myself and my staff have had throughout this award season is that when that industry decided that they wanted to perform on this issue, and I use that word very intentionally, and do the sort of theater of like, we care about women and some men being sexually harassed and violated, the ways in which it's played out in our culture have been both wildly fascinating and disappointing, in that through the Golden Globes, even through the Oscars, I think, this holds water. On the Golden Globes, I mean, nobody was pulling aside men and asking them, you know, so have you ever seen any sexual harassment on a set that you've worked on? Have you ever said anything? Have you ever it all came down to women once again.
And importantly, I want to say, I mean, I talk a lot about pop culture, we all do, that pop culture is not just some kind of shallow sort of thing that, that has to be kind of glossy or whatever. It actually, it tells us a lot about who we are and how we behave and what we prioritize. And so I think using the Globes and the Oscars as examples, and also as a way into these conversations is really important. And what I would say about the Globes is that, the idea that these A-list actresses would bring with them these social activists, and that anybody, least of all Ryan Seacrest, would have any sense of how to talk about it. It's one thing to show up with these social activists. It's another thing for these celebrity commentators and interviewers to have any idea how to talk about it. It was painfully clear. And so I wonder, Ashley, if, obviously, well, maybe there'll come a day when you or are asked to be on the carpet and it really goes down, but there has to be a way for something like that to be successful, because it's too powerful a platform to just be like, well, that didn't work, so we're not going to do it.
Yeah, it's tough in those moments, right? Because the thing that people are always going to say is nobody wants to hear about that here. This is an entertainment situation. Nobody wants to hear about that here. And obviously that's wrong because they came and they had those conversations, and those conversations, the little bit of conversation that happened, the little bit of acknowledgement that happened went viral everywhere.
That's right.
Everywhere. So clearly people are hungry for these conversations and for this content and for a little more explanation about what these actresses are actually saying that they want to see change, why they brought the activist with them. I think, had it been me, if I had been a famous actress in that situation, which never, but had I been, I think that I probably, whoever I brought, I would have sat down and said, hey, what are the most frequent questions you get from people on this subject? Now, can you talk to me a little bit about how you answer those questions? Can you talk to me a little bit about where you got that information? Whatever. And that's a labor that the activist could choose to engage in or not. But I would have brought them along not as a souvenir.
I was going to say
but
accessory.
More an accessory.
Totally, yeah.
But I would have brought them around thinking of myself as an accomplice to whatever they were trying to do.
And how much of it do you think is willful obtusity and just ignorance? I mean...
Ooh, like on a percentage?
I mean, I struggle to reconcile with being, in a position that these women are in, that they are all educated, they are all intellectually sound. I mean, most what I've read and seen, but that one pervasive, enduring blind spot of not being able to see beyond gender as an identity.
I mean, to me, when I think about things like that, what I think about is the fact that the world really wants that and sort of we've essentially built a society meant to maintain that ignorance in certain people, and especially in people of a certain class and of a certain color.
And so do you think it's ignorance more than it is obtusity?
I think it is. I think it begins with ignorance. I think at some point it becomes willful. And I think that point for a lot of people in the entertainment industry is when it starts to mess with their career. I think at that point, when you have to think about things in terms of putting your career on the line and you have this job that everybody in the world thinks they want, you start thinking, who am I to give this up? Who am I to throw this away? Let me rationalize. I can do more from the background than I can from the foreground. Like, people love to say stuff like that because rationalization is the closest that humans come to divining magic. We do it because we hate being uncomfortable. We hate it. And I think these people hate being uncomfortable. They know that if they say certain things, if they do certain things, there are tough questions that they're going to have to answer, that they're scared to answer. And I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying that, like, it absolutely, at this point, is the easy route. It's the easy route.
And so you're like the antithesis of that. Like, I don't know if you all follow Ashley. I mean, I feel like everybody in the country does. But you are constantly always shining lights on everybody else and just bringing sort of like this sense of joy in other people's success, other women's success, for sure.
I feel like it's mine. I feel like when women win, I feel like when Black people win, I feel like when queer people win, I win. I feel like that's mine too.
And so do you think that that is inherent to your identity as Black and queer?
I think, I like to think so.
Yeah.
But nah, it's not inherent. It's not, it's something that I chose to prioritize. It's a way that I decided to be in a lot of ways. Because the scarcity thing never appealed to me. It never made sense to me. The idea that there's only so much for everybody and we all got to go out there and scrap and fight and beat each other up and tear each other down to get it is wild to me and is not indicative of the way I've seen anything in real life work out. The better I am to other people, the better people have been to me. And I mean, that's just how I've seen it so far, and it works out.
Which to me is what feminism should be.
Yep.
Well, I was going to say what Ashley just explained about the scarcity. I find that to be one of the most pervasive patriarchal fables. That there's only so much, and the only reason that you're here, marginalized identity here, is because you are special. That says more about them than it does about you. You're not special. That's just something they tell you when they don't give other people things who are like you.
Yeah, and they try it all the time. They put me in those gifted classes and bust me off to a white people school when I was in, I mean, it really was. My school that I grew up in was like 95% Black. I took some tests, I read at a high level, and their response to that was 3 days a week to bus me to a school full of white kids and tell me that I was getting a better education because I got to go there 3 days a week. Meanwhile, I was smarter than those kids, to be perfectly, like I was. And I would sit in that class and I would think, this is the smart class? Like, what's so smart about these kids? And the only thing that was different in a lot of cases was that, you know, those kids had computers and color printers at home, and we didn't.
I want to pivot and talk a little bit about the sort of the universality of feminism in terms of moving forward and the way in which I have envisioned it throughout my life. Like, I've always felt like being a woman is sort of the easiest part of my identity. It never struck me as like, oh, I'm not going to get to do this or get to do that because I'm a woman or a girl. It's because people are racist. And so I think about, you know, the way in which Black women and women of color are always kind of managing both of those identities, but while also being deeply humanist about it. And so we're going to take a listen to something. Wait. Let's see. Okay. This is sort of an experimental piece of storytelling that Ashley and I did. She had never seen or knew about the work of Black contemporary artist Kara Walker. Kara Walker is known for her cut-out silhouettes of antebellum Southern figures. It's grueling and beautiful work. And so I invited Ashley to see an exhibit of Walker's work with me, and I brought a recorder, because that's what I do. Take a listen.
Ashley writes about art and culture and gender and race, and was new to Kara Walker, I think. Hadn't really heard much about her or seen too much of her work, but the two of you went on to the show, and you brought a microphone along, which is a good thing. So let's listen.
My eyes first went to the trowel, digging a grave.
The way the tree has no fruit, no leaves, it's a barren tree, holding up all of these like images that to me are just like, oh wow, like look what this tree has to bear, and it looks like it's like sacrificed its fruit to hold it all. And this kid with like the KKK, like the sheet over his head is cutting at it. The fact that he's cutting the branch that holds him up
is.
Yeah. But also, we look at this idea of negative images or salacious images, or, I don't know what it is that makes me feel like there's so much love put into this work, if only because of the sheer amount of detail. So when I listen to that, I feel like what we're doing there, that aired on the Takeaway at WNYC, what we're doing there is feminism. It's like we're interpreting the memory and testimony and talent expressed by a Black woman in America, and living alongside of it. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, but I think I see my introduction or like my involvement with art and art making is very new. I was very intimidated by art museums and art making, visual art making for a really long time, even as a consumer of it. But one of the things I've noticed about myself now when I interpret any kind of art is basically everything's a uterus in my mind. I know, I know that sounds weird, but kind of everything is. Like everything to me is something giving birth to something else. And I think, even as I was talking about that tree and I was talking about, like, I hear myself talking about it bearing fruit and I'm like, I'm talking about a uterus again. Like, I know that that's what I'm talking about. Like, and I think that seeing that art, especially from an artist like Carol Walker, whose work I've become a lot more familiar with since, is just the communication of it feels familiar in a way that I think I'm not familiar with. Because a lot of the art that I was introduced to early on was all art by white men. And like old dead white men. And that's just in general. Like, I'm not special. That's most of us. We're introduced to art by dead old white dudes.
And literature and story.
And literature, like all, like art in general.
Yeah.
But so I felt like that work was in conversation with me in a way that I'd never really experienced with art before.
So I think what I'm trying to get at, Koa, maybe you can speak to this with what you do at Jezebel and your staff, is like just sort of to not have a linear idea of what feminism is. If we are going to move forward or talk about what it looks like in the future, it just can't be linear. It hasn't really worked so well for those of us who are not white women, right? So can you talk a little bit about the way in which feminism is infused in the work that you all do?
Sure. One of the changes that myself and the staff worked on not long after I started is that I wanted to drop quote-unquote women's issues. That's always felt like a very white term to me, and it's obviously a very cis term, and like you can keep going down the list. It's very singular, and it also feels very outdated to me. And I'm 31. So I've asked them to not only drop that as a term we use, although it's Jezebel, so we use it ironically, but we're also stopped looking through things through the lens of women's issues. I've asked them to switch it over to gender. And so the way this is manifesting in our reporting is that when I rewrote the style guide, for our abortion coverage, our birth control coverage, things that fall under more traditional women's issues, I've asked them to start doing, for a piece of legislation, TK as would impact women and other marginalized genders, as would impact women and non-binary identities. So we're doing this translation for a lot of things that we're seeing and reporting on in real time. Another change that I've asked the staff to do, and we're starting to do already, is that in my tenure at Jezebel, especially under a Trump administration, I want immigration explicitly framed as a feminist issue on Jezebel. I feel like a lot of what I'm reading, what I'm seeing, you can't even talk about immigration in this climate without hitting on like 5 tentpole, quote-unquote, feminist issues. In that,
What are a couple of those?
wage gap, sexual harassment, abortion access, birth control access. But when I look out on the press landscape, it's just not presented that way. They're still broken up into pieces. And the immigration stories, quote unquote, live in different areas or are presented in different ways. They're not filtered under quote unquote women's issues, or the stories are not necessarily translated with that tonality.
How much of this is about the language and the actual vocabulary we use to talk about these issues, and how much of it is about what we are willing and or able to absorb? When you think about the vastness of the things that you just said,
Yeah.
you know, it's hard to keep up with all those things. I don't think it's impossible.
No.
But how much of it is about making our brains bigger, and how much of it is about rebooting our language and the way that we talk about these things?
I think it's both, and that one of the reasons I really wanted to take this job when it was offered to me is that Jezebel readers are really savvy, and they have been for 10 years. I think it's really telling, especially in this Me Too climate. Allegations and reports that were reported on Jezebel 7 years ago are now on the front page of the New York Times. So I feel uniquely poised to push all kinds of agendas and vocabulary and change the way people think on my platform, because they're really the most amazing audience to do it with. They're so brilliant. And that isn't to say that I'm not anticipating some pushback, especially because the Jezebel readers who have been there for a really, really long time. And I know that I'm eventually going to publish and promote things that's going to challenge their feminism or what they think feminism is. But I'm going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think that, yeah, language evolves. Also, I don't think it's so much that we need to necessarily reboot language. I think there are some words that kind of need to die, that we don't need to be saying in casual conversation anymore. And I think that there are words now and phrases and terminology to replace those words. And I also think that the whole point of getting older and growing and learning and changing things is expansion. We're supposed to expand. If it's hard to absorb, you'll make room for it. I've never heard of anybody ever getting to a point where your brain is not an iPhone battery, or a storage plan. It expands, it keeps going, it keeps moving. And if you want to be an expansive person, if you want to be a person with room to accept many different ways of being and living and looking forward, then yeah, your language will expand because it's important to you and because you want to do it correctly. People talk about, political correctness, and there are all these debates about political correctness and what it is and what it means. And to me, you don't even have to say political correctness. My whole thing is I'm just trying to say what I mean. If there's a word that a community or a person, it really doesn't matter. If there's a word that actually means what I'm trying to say, I don't need to say it incorrectly just because that's the word I'm familiar with or the word that introduced it to me.
Because I think that, obviously we're in a very, very judgmental society anyway, but now that we're on social media and Twitter and so on and so forth, you use the wrong word.
Yeah. But I don't mind people telling me that.
But I'm saying, but just as an example of a word that maybe either you used, correctly or quote unquote incorrectly, or where you're looking for a particular word. If you can think of one, if you can't, that's fine too.
Okay, the word crazy.
Yeah.
Or describing people as crazy. That's something I used to do all the time, and I didn't think about it. And I was like, I don't know, shit, some people are just crazy. I don't know. That's a thing that I would say. And even though I'm a person, it would be really easy for me to be look, I have mental illness, okay? So I get to choose what word. But people would come into my mentions and they would say, hey, just so you know, it makes me feel when you use that word, because I feel like it has this negative connotation, and the way that you're using it makes it sound like it's a replacement for mental illness or for a mental health issue or for bipolar disorder or for whatever it is. And I had to step back and think, okay, that's the word I'm used to. And maybe I've lived 30 years with nobody saying to me, you shouldn't use that word. But what the hell does that have to do with right now? When somebody's coming to me and telling me that that's not the appropriate language for what I meant to say. I just want to say what I mean. I don't like being misrepresented. And if I don't like being misrepresented, then that means I have to say what I mean. And there's nothing to get defensive about. It's just expand. Grow into the person you're trying to be, and let your language grow into the kind of meaning that you're trying to make as well.
So many of who we're trying to include in this conversation to make change are not wanting to expand.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You have a very brilliant, savvy, loyal audience. Do you think about getting newer folks to come in and try to expand?
Definitely. One of the things that I'm really envious of people who are 10 years-ish younger than me is that I was lucky in that I got this really incredible formative college experience. I went to a women's college, which I loved. And I learned about gender in this super sanitized classroom, with theory and like Judith Butler and that kind of stuff. And I loved it, but it was so inaccessible. And I had to unlearn so many things and had to like really labor over this terminology and trying to understand it. It's since informed my reporting. It's informed other things that I've done, other writing. People 10 years younger than me learned about gender on Tumblr. Mm-hmm. They learned about gender in Instagram comments. They are so fluent in terminology that I struggled to understand at 18, 19, 20 years old. And at 16, they just have it and they just speak that way. I am thrilled by this for a number of reasons, but as somebody who runs a media platform, I mean, that means that they have all this academic language, precise language with which to explain their own experiences, the experience of their friends, other people. And so it's definitely something that I'm looking to capitalize on. In that, back when I was a slightly younger woman in media, one of the criticisms I used to get on a lot of my pieces is that it was too academic and that the language I was using was too particular. And now the 16-year-olds know what I'm talking about.
That's so interesting. I'm gonna play another clip. I have a lot of thoughts about objectivism in journalism as a black woman journalist, as a black woman opinion writer, black woman writer, all those things. But mainly that the rules or standards of objectivity were established by white men. So my sense of an experience of objectivity is not that. But you and Jessica Bennett, Koa and Jessica Bennett do a weekly conversation on The Takeaway. And we're going to listen to a clip talking about how to cover this Me Too movement.
And in so many of these cases, there really isn't a paper trail. I used a lot of journals. All of these women had written in journals at the time. And so I was able to collect a lot of journal entries, which, sure, could somebody fake a journal, but probably they're not going to. Mm-hmm. And so that, I thought, was really valuable.
I know that at Jezebel, we have been inundated with more tips than ever. And the meetings that I'm having with certain staff members who are being put on these stories, I'm in these conversations where, I am asking the question, did she tell anyone? And more often than not, she didn't. And so I'm rethinking different ways to corroborate that this happened through mental health history, through depression, through any records you have of seeing a therapist. If there are any colleagues you worked with who can account for any erratic behavior, if you seemed off, if you quit suddenly. But even that is very limited in that we are privileging victims who have access to mental health care and who can receive a depression diagnosis and who did have access to a therapist. So for myself and my staff, it is an ongoing conversation to rethink this.
So there's a lot to unpack there. Mm-hmm. One of the first things I thought about was memory, and how you heard at the top of my sort of outdated bio that I was a producer for the Charlie Rose Show, and I recently wrote a piece in Esquire about my experience there in light of his sexual harassment allegations. And the first thing I thought when I went to write it was, someone's going to question whether this is real, whether I remembered it correctly. So I went back. Luckily, I had kept journals sort of religiously at that time, and sort of found all of, there it was, looking at me straight in the face. But so there's that one thing. But also, you said, you'd had people say you were too academic, but I have had people say, and I'm sure Ashley has as well, that we're pushing our own agendas. So can you talk about how those two sort of tenets affect the way in which you serve both your readership, but also tell these stories of women and feminism?
Sure. With Me Too specifically, one of the things that I felt really initially as Weinstein happened and then the allegations started to snowball into other industries is, as somebody who has reported sexual assault and sexual harassment for 8 years, I felt very affirmed in that I have spent a large part of my career, both publicly and also people I know, saying this is an epidemic. This happens a lot. This is 1 in 5 women. This is someone you know. And for the first time, the news cycle actually started to reflect these numbers. And it wasn't just data. It was people we recognized. It was people we knew. But, of course, with that snowballing came questioning about, whether we're being too rash and what is sexual harassment and what isn't. I mean, my agenda is simply facts in that this is a raging epidemic. Sexual harassment is underreported. Sexual assault is underreported. That is factual. That isn't necessarily me at Jezebel, we have this running joke of ruin a man. And you actually don't have to, because the data shows that they do it on their own. It's just that we exist in this power structure in which, they, until very recently, were able to get away with it. Having said that, you have to look at this through the scope in that, we're talking about a firing of between 60 and a number of high-profile men. That's nothing. That's absolutely nothing compared to the data of how pervasive this is. That's nothing. So the idea that this has somehow gone too far, or that just men are being held to too high a standard of not violating people is not factual.
I mean, I think the other thing too is that the most high-profile folks, men who have been called out or punished or fired or whatever, are all 65 and older
Yeah.
and white and rich as fuck.
Yeah.
And who, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And are totally, are probably all yo, come out to Bellport, come out to whatever, we'll be cool, we'll just ride this out or whatever. And so I sort of it's not that I think that they should be imprisoned or should be much more rash or whatever, but I do feel like there's something lost in translation there. Ashley, you're nodding your head.
Girl, because I'm just over here, I'm just yup. I don't want to say it out loud, but that's how I feel. It's, the whole, it's going too far, what about this? People are always going to feel like that when it comes to their doorstep, I think what started happening is people started feeling like it was getting too close to their own lives. And that's when they started screeching about it going too far. Because one of the issues that we have, and I've written quite a bit, and even my book deals with the fact that I'm the child of an incarcerated man. My dad was in prison for 30 years for sexual assault. That's why he went to prison. And I knew that, or I was told that when I was 14, which was about 6 months after I was sexually assaulted, and it was terrible. But one of the things that situation taught me really, really early on is that you can have a fantastic experience of someone, with someone, you can love someone. My dad had been sending me letters my entire life about how I was his favorite person in the entire world and how much he loved me and thought I was brilliant and beautiful and all these other things. Those letters were my self-esteem for many years. They were everything to me. And then I found out what he had done. I found out about this crime, and what I spent several years after trying to, which is a very simple truth actually, but it took me a really long time to reconcile, is that you can love and care for someone, and someone can love and care for you, and they can be the best person in your life, and they could be somebody else's nightmare. It's just true. They could be the worst thing that happened ever to somebody else, even if they are the best thing that ever happened to you. And you have to be able to go, I love this person or care about this person, or maybe I love their work, or, like whatever it is, but they did something wrong and they should be held accountable for what they did wrong. And I don't get to decide what that consequence looks like because I am not their victim. You have to be able to do that. And a lot of people feel this weird guilt about even having liked someone who did something horrible. And so instead of just like dealing with the fact that, no, I can like a person's, where maybe, yes, I loved his movies and now he did something terrible and now maybe he'll never see a dime of my money again. But that doesn't make me a bad person for the years that I loved his movies. And if you feel like that's where you have to go in your mind, that you have to have been a bad person or a stupid person or whatever it was to have loved or cared for someone who did something terrible, then of course your first inclination is to defend yourself. In a lot of situations, people are not trying to defend that person. They're defending themselves. They're defending their perception, because I would never be friends with someone who could do something like that. I would never marry someone so terrible. I would never, it's like, they're not monsters. They're just people. They're just dudes. They're just dudes. And sometimes dudes do terrible shit. And we have to be able to go, that dude did a terrible thing. And even if I loved him or something he did, I can acknowledge that and know that actually it doesn't have shit to do with who I am.
That is so well said, and just to add and bring it to an added complexity, as a parent to a boy, a brown boy, we recently had this conversation about Chris Brown, and how he's still out there, and a lot of people like his music, blah blah blah, this and that, and so he asked me, like, how should I feel about this guy? And I said, well, I know how I feel about him. Yeah, well, we try. I know how I feel about him, but I come from a different, a place and time and a different positioning. And he said, well, I feel like he's maybe not that well. And I said, he's definitely not that well. And he said, well, then that's why he did what he did, right? And I said, well, but then he doesn't get held accountable. So I think that this idea of accountability, and I think it's very relevant in terms of the conversation about feminism and how we decide what that means, is a tough one. Because what you just said is very clear for you, but I also think there's so many folks who are caught up on this idea of both accountability and what that says about them when they call it out. Yeah. Specifically in regard to feminism and rights and who we are as women. Can you speak?
Sure. I feel like, too, jumping off of what Ashley said, a lot about watching this climate for me has exposed a lot about how people think and how people think they think about sexual assault, but also just like seeing people's talking points be challenged. Two things I'm noticing that are really common in that up until fairly recently, mainstream media like to do this thing where when a predator would surface or be reported, it was like, well, this can't be true because he was nice to this woman over here. So like that invalidates that, which is like doesn't make any factual sense at all. Also, like if you dig more into data about, certain types of assault and predatory behavior, there can be a lot of conditioning that goes into it and a lot of selection about who to prey on and like how to groom them for that sort of abuse and that thing. So like that does not square. And then another thing that I'm seeing, particularly among other women, particularly among white women, speaking in this space, is it's very quick the ways in which I'm hearing, that is not my experience, therefore it is illegitimate.
Right.
And I'm seeing that a lot in op-eds. I'm seeing it a lot in tweets.
Full circle. We've come full circle back to white feminism. Sorry to pick on y'all, but but I really do feel like in terms of the frontier and moving forward with feminism, we have to address that enduring blind spot of white women sort of saying, doesn't resonate for me. So I don't know. I think that we should take some questions at this point and see how to go forward. We have
Y'all,
someone
it's
right
cold
here.
in here. Y'all not cold?
You cold?
I'm a little cold.
Really?
Yeah, maybe my iron's low.
So the question that I have is not a new one, so my apologies, but I respect this panel, so I would like your perspective. And this has been part of the conversation that I've heard a lot in these types of discussions, that often the onus is on the oppressed to end oppression. And a lot of this conversation of Me Too includes the frustration of women, and of specifically cis women, that it's on the shoulders of women to quote unquote like make men behave better. So my friend and I noted as we came in the room that it appears to be a rather cis female audience. And so I'd like to sort of volley the question to the panelists, since you're sort of the power and the voice in the room, whether you think that's problematic in any kind of way, that the sort of cis male body is missing from this room, because I fear that that's a body that might be missing from the conversation of the future of feminism, and whether that's important, whether that matters, and sort of being the panelists, if you would have liked to see something different, or if you don't see, the missing of the male body, the cis male body, as problematic in this environment.
I'm married to that person, by the way.
Yeah. I wasn't gonna, put all your business out on Front Street. But I was looking at you like, girl, I seen you on Koa's Insta. I know who you are. The cis male, I think that I would love to see more cis males in situations like that. I would love to see more cis men in crowds listening to conversations like this. But I would like them to be in crowds listening. Usually when cis men come to things...
Period.
I mean,
yeah. Hello.
I'm just being real.
I heard that.
I'm just being real. Usually when cis men come to stuff like this, they're waiting for the mic because they're waiting for their comment that they've been working on since they got here. And it's never, they stand up for the Q&A. They don't never have a question. It's just like they want to make a statement to stand up for all the men who aren't like that. Look, I'm marrying a cis man in September. Not just a cis man, but like a white cis man. And his people are from Kentucky. Okay? I'm having these conversations, not just with him. He's not we're engaged in conversation. I have brothers. My father is out of prison now. We talk on the phone 3 times a week. He'd call more if I let him, but I'm like, Dad, I need a couple nights, you know what I mean? Please. But I'm constantly in conversation with cis men about these kinds of things. And, I would like to see more of them in rooms like this. But I guess the way I feel about it is, I'm not begging nobody to show up and have a conversation. Mm-hmm. It's one of those things where it's like, we could do this with you, or we can do it without you.
And we'd be fine with that.
I'm okay with that. I'm a Capricorn. I'll run right over you. I don't care.
I think it's also super telling that as these allegations have been reported and come out, you have these very earnest reactions from men being like, what? Whipping my dick out in front of a woman is, not okay. Really? And then by the same token, you have a lot of them talking about how shocked they are that so many women experience this and have experienced a spectrum of abuse, since they were born. And so I think it really speaks to the disappointing ways in which we've made women's experiences optional. Mm-hmm. Whether that's through film, literature, reporting, visibility, it cuts across so many facets of our culture. And Lindy West, a Jezebel alum, just said this in the New York Times, but men don't take women's studies, women do. Mm-hmm. And that is the problem, that you can be this really, primary gender in our culture and just be completely inoculated against this experience that has defined a lot of women's lives.
Half of other people.
Yeah.
Just somewhat, half of other people have whole lives.
Yeah. And the fact that, we're only seeing this movement now through men's concerns about being fired, I think is also telling. Like, you care now that it's punitive.
I mean, I also think, though, that even the most quote-unquote woke ones and evolved ones really need to think about some stuff. I mean, I am married to a professor of like race and gender and history. And I don't think I could be married to a white man if he wasn't like studied in those areas. But even still, it's like he's one of the good ones, but there are conversations where it's like, nope, at all. And it's hard for cis men to hear that.
I think it's interesting that all of us on this panel have white partners.
It is. It's super
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. Messed up.
It's messed up. And it's also like, listen, in the Trump in the Trump era, it's like,
Listen.
I mean,
I tell people all the time, me and Kelly started dating in the Obama years when anything felt possible, okay? If Kelly had swooped in 2016,
Right?
it might be
You
a
know what I'm saying?
whole other situation.
I am telling you.
If he had pulled up in that pickup truck with that accent, I might have been like, I don't know. Woo!
It's so true. It's
I don't know.
true. It's serious.
I was
critical.
Open.
Another question over here.
Thank you all so much for being here. I was wondering if you would speak, or would be comfortable speaking to, sort of the capitalization of feminism, right? So like particularly the Women's March, because this week it's been an interesting conversation about what all leaders look like, right? And what co-leadership looks like, and what it looks like to be like, oh, this is a bunch of leaders, but they're co-leaders because we don't want it to be hierarchical, but they're still the people that we're talking about because they did this massive thing. And kind of what that does to the way that, like, when we're not in this room and we're not the group that we currently are, right, how everyone else that doesn't come to these kind of events, right, is talking about feminism. Because the Women's March is very, like the Women's March TM is the way that, like, I think a lot of these conversations are happening, and Me Too TM is how these conversations are happening. For everyone else's, like, viewing. And so I was wondering if you would speak to what that does to the way that we navigate educating people who otherwise aren't in these conversations. Does that make sense as a question? I'm sorry.
Consumerism and feminism is my favorite topic, so you now may officially be here for a while. I think that I come from women's media, so and traditional women's media, so I've been very close to this relationship for a large part of my career, and I'm not really sure when it happened. I've spent a lot of my professional time trying to figure this out, but something happened between, like, literacy on the wage gap, we'll just say, is one issue, and like what that is, and the fact that like you can be underpaid for a variety of reasons, and then being able to buy empowerment. That empowerment is something that can be sold to you as a woman or a variety of people in this society. And that is the relationship that I have focused on the most and wondered why. And I see it across a lot of things, between like newsletters from products, courses, books, all kinds of things. And somehow, I mean, you can see really extreme examples of that, right? Like, you know, it's gonna be the 20th anniversary of Sex and the City, and like, the fact that, you know, that show was lauded as being super feminist, and it's like a bunch of like financially illiterate women, you know, spending money on designer shoes, and it's supposed to be an empowering choice. I don't understand. Among other things about that show.
Yeah, I don't know. It's weird. I feel like it started to happen right as I moved to New York, which was in like 2014. Or at least that's when I started to notice it. And that's when everything that somebody was trying to sell me became a shade of pink.
Yeah.
And the pink was not necessarily because I was a girl, but it was in celebration of the fact that I was a girl.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, hold on a second. Like, because I thought, and then it was like, no, and then it was just conferences and meetups and it's like people really have fed into this industry. And I think some people saw it as an opportunity to sort of like, oh, I can be social and I can like empower women and I can offer them advice or whatever and I can make money off of that, and I can make that my living. And I think that, okay, fine, cool, whatever. But so then like the corporate thing happened. Mm-hmm. And then the corporate thing it used to be that like these things would start small and then a corporation or somebody would come along and like make it bigger or scale it or legitimize it or whatever.
Feminism TM.
Yeah. But now they're just coming up with it themselves. It's like, why should we go find some little group or a woman who has created like a community on her own and like, give her money when I'm pretty sure we could do that. We could just create a little community or whatever and then, throw some millennial pink on it and you put at least one thin blonde in front of it, like it should work out. There's nothing wrong with being thin and blonde, but y'all sell stuff. Y'all sell stuff like just with like the way you look. Like thin blondes were the ones who started wearing all that, the French lady stuff, and now everybody wants to be a French lady.
Oh my God, the French girl formula.
The French girl thing. Everybody's got like a
French
boat neck
girl.
shirt with like stripes on it.
You know what I'm talking about.
I do.
How to do your hair like a French girl. How to sleep in like a French girl.
How to not gain weight like a French girl.
Yeah.
Like all of that stuff, and it came from these really particular places. And there's not, and it's one of those things where it's like, look, you found a look that works for you, baby, go with it. I am still rocking middle-aged Spelman Women's Studies professor. And I just turned 31.
Yeah, I was
but
just
that's
gonna
my
say.
look. That's
Yeah,
my look.
I was
That's
just
what I'm
gonna
going
say.
for.
I would also say too that one of the dangerous things in just thinking about what Ashley was saying, like if empowerment is something that can be sold, there are really just extreme class implications there. Because who is feminism for then? It's for rich white women.
Yes, that is true. I also think that feminism, as it has been defined historically, it really begs the question of what it means to be a woman, right? I mean, for most of my formative years and my young adulthood, as I said, like being a woman was the easiest part of my identity. It's like we give life, like we create, like this. Like who is not more powerful than women? But that thinking is exclusive of what?
No, that was me. Sorry, I had water on my mouth and I was
you're like
getting it
got
off.
spinach on your nose. But that's not inclusive of transgender women and transgender folks, and so I feel like it's this thinking of tear it all down, but then how do we do that?
Yeah. How do we do that and acknowledge the very real issues that affect people in different categories? Like, yes, that is absolutely a struggle, and I'm always trying to think about how to do that. I have a lot of gender nonconforming and non-binary folks in my life who I know I want to be as like safe as possible for them. I think that's what it really is. It's like I just want to be a safe place for them. And I'm not going to say it's easy figuring out how to do that. I'm just going to say it's worth it. And it's in line with the person that I'm trying to be. It doesn't mean it's going to be an easy conversation. I think all three of us understand that we work in this space because these are not easy conversations. But at the same time, I think that like what we have to stop doing is telling people, it's so easy. Oh, you'll just get it. Like eventually, like it's so easy. Just tell them like, no, it's going to be hard. It's worth it. And you have to decide, whether or not you're going to put in the work to be the kind of person that you think you really want to be. Like that's that should be the easy part, is just making that decision. Sorry, you don't have to clap. That was nothing.
Let's take two more questions. We've got some one up front here. We have a microphone up here. Okay, right here. Okay. Nope. She's like, I could just project.
You can come talking to this.
This one, yep, that works. Okay, you said something earlier that was like catnip, and I kind of want you to go back and speak more about it. It was about how to create agency without also suggesting hierarchy.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a really difficult thing to do. I think that when you step into your agency, and if you want to talk about consumerism and the way that we market that and the way that we lionize that and idolize that, it's very hard to avoid it feeling like that person has that and is in control and is in power. And so, in the same vein of sort of trying to create new vocabulary and new language, and I look very much to the trans community, which has created new language and vocabulary to try to think of different ways of saying, I have this agency, but that doesn't mean that I'm more important or have more power or that I'm better, right, than you are. But that's something that I'm constantly thinking about, constantly trying to write about, trying to dissect.
I try to think about it in terms of roles versus levels. I'm not really thinking about things in terms of like, the C-suite and, the whatever. I don't even really know what C-suite means. I know that people say it a lot. I'm just going to expose myself right now. I really don't know what that means. But it's like people say these things, but it's about levels when they're talking about that stuff. When I've been a part of like, on like networking groups and stuff like that, and people start talking about, okay, what level do I have to be at for this? And it's like, I prefer to think about things just in terms of roles. And the role you take on in an organization, in a campaign, in a community, in a household, whatever it is, I try not to think about it in terms of like this above this above this, and instead more like, if you look at a room full of people or whatever who are in a meeting, everybody's sitting at the same level usually. They don't really put anybody above you. Like, you don't sit in layers, right? Like,
Head of the table, though.
there's a head of the table.
Yeah.
And the head of the table means
just
something.
Just to build on that, our
Yeah.
entire society is built on this next level, next level, next level.
And levels. And I think that, like, if we looked at things more the way they are, which is very actually, like from just a visual standpoint, very flat and very like when people are in a room, they are all at the same level and people are sort of taking care of different parts of the room. There are people in the corners, there are people in the center, there are people on the sides, whatever. And we might give certain parts of the room more credibility or more power than others, but that's not because there is inherently more power. It's because we give those roles that power. We put them on levels.
But that doesn't mean also that you don't respect experience.
No.
But that I think is something that people don't think about.
But experience is part of a role. Like experience that's still a part of like what you do. Like a role is like, in terms of experiences, like if I have the experience doing that, if I'm the person who has that knowledge and I've been doing it for 10 years or whatever, and you barely know how to work that thing, then yeah, I'm the person in that role and I should be respected as such in that role. You should listen to me when I'm talking about what I'm doing in that role. Absolutely. But at the same time, you know how I feel sometimes about experience, which is like sometimes people just got there first. And it's not that they actually do the job better.
One more question. One in the back here. On the left. Blue sweater. In front of the pillar, yeah.
Thank you. If feminism has a future, what, in God's name, happens to the patriarchy? Does it wither? Does it dry up? Does it go away? How do we make it go away?
The more pressing question
of the night.
Perfect.
Right?
Yeah.
And a lot of different ways, all at the same time. That's how you defeat the patriarchy. There's no one way. There's no one person No, like nobody has like the one way, the one answer. You know, like I think we get used to like superhero movies and stuff like that. It's like somebody always does the kill strike, right? That's so important. You know, it was gonna be Harry or it was gonna be Neville. Somebody's gonna make the kill
Is that
strike.
a Harry Potter reference?
But I'm sorry.
Was that a Harry Potter reference?
Yeah, it is a Harry
Oh, okay.
Potter reference. Somebody's gonna make the kill strike. Nobody's gonna make the kill strike. It's gonna take everybody who believes in a better future, who believes in the future of feminism and the end of patriarchy, finding a way in their own lives to chip away at that shit for as long as possible. And if we do that from many different directions, from many different perspectives, in many different ways, I think that it won't have any recourse. You just need people who believe to act.
I mean, also, it's so intertwined with race and racism and the way in which we are a foundationally white supremacist country, which is so deeply rooted in patriarchy as well, and vice versa. And I think there are going to be so many moments and times and conversations that are just plain ugly. I don't mean uncomfortable. I mean ugly and deeply, deeply frightening. And we have to be able to sit in that fear and that frighteningness and that ugliness and see what we feel in there. But you know, it's what we all do in media is that we chip away at it. We write a piece here, we assign a piece there, we do something here.
Choke it out.
That's right. That's right.
I would also say, too, that a big part of defeating this is keeping abreast with how it changes and the way that this way of thinking gets recoded with time and how we find new words for racist principles and new words for misogynistic principles. There is this urgency I sometimes see in my own industry to pronounce things over. I see that a lot with like cultural things, you know, different terminology we use. But it's important to keep your ear attuned. My wife and I have this phrase we use in our house that I would really like embroidered on a pillow that's like, if it looks racist, it's probably racist.
Yeah. And on that note, thank you to my amazingly brilliant, funny, and smart panelists, and to you all for coming out.
Thank you, guys.
Perfect.
Thank you so much.
Such a pleasure. Yeah, it was really good. Really good.